This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name is Ladek, and my guest for today is Hadiya Nuriddin. Hadiya is the founder and owner of Duets Learning. She has over 20 years experience in learning and development, and she specializes in instructional design and development in both academic and corporate environments. Hadiya is the author of the book StoryTraining, Selecting and Shaping Stories That Connect. And so in this storytime conversation, Hadiya and I talk about the highlights and expectations for readers of her new book, StoryTraining, which focuses on personal storytelling. We then move on to talk about using your personal story to facilitate learning, and just how personal do you have to be, and why it's so important to actually practice your story if you want to be successful. Hadiya then discusses why the power that you have as a storyteller comes from your intent, and how to connect with others through vulnerability. And she includes a specific example of a powerful reveal in a story that she actually tells. We then move on to tie everything together with Hadiya's take on whether or not AI is telling stories and what the future holds for the humans who actually make those stories in real life. And remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. So if you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe. Now, I give you Hadiya Nuriddin. Hadiya, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Where do we find you in the world today?
Where do you find me in the world? Well, I am just outside of Chicago to the west of the city. I've been working from my home for about 12 years now, ever since I've been on my own. But before that, I was born and raised in Detroit. Moved here 25 years ago, and happy to be here. I love Chicago.
A Midwest lady, for sure.
Midwest. Good old Midwest stock.
I feel like, we would, it's almost remiss that we don't riff for a while on, I've been a remote worker for 17 years myself.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody thought it was so sexy and cool, over the last 2 or 3 years. And you and I were going to be like, you know what?
Well, what I learned about myself was that during the pandemic, it's like the deal was that I could work from anywhere. Not just work from home. Like I used to go to Starbucks and people watch and work and barely get work done and come back home and say I didn't get work done. Yeah, I used to love that. I loved the electricity in the city and being able to watch all of that, not just to stay at home. That really wasn't what I signed up for. But it's better than the opposite, I think, of going to the office. But again, it's about choice. It's like I always say, I want to be wherever I'm not.
Yep.
So
I feel that. Absolutely. Wonderful. You've built this career, and I don't know if it's been the last 12 years, but how long has Duets Learning been around? Is that the last 12 years?
Yeah, I changed the name recently. The first name I picked for my company was boring, and the email address was too long. So I've always wanted a musical name for my company. So in 2020, I chose Duets, and it's a reminder to me of how I'm partnering with my clients and how we're making beautiful music together.
Awesome.
That's why I picked the name. So, when people say, well, who are you in business with? Who are you doing the duet with? I can say, you.
That's right.
You.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, tell us about the beautiful music that you do make as a designer, as a leader, as an instructor, as as someone in this space. What have you been delivering for the past decade or so, and what do you focus on?
Well, I like to think of my career in 4 quadrants. I hope I can remember what they are. The first one is what pays the bills. It's instructional design, e-learning development, and all of that. The other one is writing. And so I have my book StoryTraining that I wrote, and I have a couple of other publications. So I do quite a bit of that. The other one is, oddly enough, quality assurance, something that I'm obsessed with, quality management principles. So I do a lot of speaking about that. And finally, there's speaking. So I'll do that at different conferences for different chapters or at different companies. So those are the 4 corners of my career. And that's another reason why I do like being on my own, because I can sort of chart that course. I know that some are fortunate enough to have employers that sort of respect all of that and say, sure, jet set, go off and speak at a conference. I don't trust that I'll be that lucky. So I said to stay on my own and do my own thing. But yeah, it's been fun.
I just have to say that we had the privilege, or I had the privilege of talking with you a little, in the green room before we started this. And then, just right now, your energy must make you, like, anybody who's getting QA from you must be so delighted. It's like, your grammar is terrible, but I'm happy to hear that from you, because I think that you probably delivered so fantastic. Wow. I would love that.
Very calming. So first, let's just start with this class is terrible. And then let's back up. Let's talk about how we got there.
Nice. Fantastic. We are going to talk today specifically about personal storytelling. I want to set the stage with that by having you talk a little bit about your storytelling book, though, first. So kind of like, you give me like, what's, for someone who hasn't read it yet, what are the highlights? Like, what would I take away from reading the book?
Yeah. So the book has one primary focus, and it is really about you using your own stories to help facilitate learning. And there's a couple of different reasons why you would want to do that. I don't know if it's always appropriate to do it, but there are certain times when you have to really connect to a person, and stories are a great way to do that. But moreover, it's not just about you telling stories. It's about you using that as a way to make people feel comfortable enough to share their stories as well. And so you can use that in a variety of different contexts. One is in a classroom, when you want your learners to be able to express a little vulnerability or share some of the struggles that they're having. But you can also use it as a learning designer if you're working with subject matter experts and you're trying to get a story out of them. So you've been able to call on a story that, again, is very important. That it's a story that has a specific intent in mind, and that you're being purposeful about why you're sharing that particular story. And we all know that when you're working with a subject matter expert, they may not give you information, but they love to correct you, right? So if you are able to share information and say, was it like that? They're happy to say, no, it was like this, right? And so you're sort of, we say, tell me a story. I think we are presumptuous in thinking people know what we're talking about. But you being able to put your own stories on display and be able to reach those sort of corners of your mind that can connect to others, that does teach other people how to do it as well. So the book talks about that moment where you realize that a story is needed and that content isn't enough, and you need to come up with something quick and fast in front of all of those people that's gonna make sense. So that's what the book is really rooted in.
Hi, I'm jumping into the conversation real quick to ask you a very simple, quick favor. If you are enjoying what you're listening to right now, if it's interesting, if it's entertaining, if you're pulling away value, if you're learning something, whatever the case may be, do me a favor and just hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. If it's on your phone, if you're listening on a computer, whatever it is, just take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe. It helps us. You'll never miss an episode, and everybody wins. And if you really like this content, a lot, come on over to eLearn Magazine, throw your email address in there, and subscribe there as well for other great content around our blog posts, around the events we play, and of course, this podcast as well. Thank you very much. And now back to the show.
Awesome. So take me to the specifics around building the muscle of personal storytelling. I know you just essentially gave a great overview of all of those aspects, but I want to go deeper in that, where my mind first goes is, do I need to have like a portfolio of kind of 5 stories that I'm always like, that I've practiced, that I'm ready to kind of pull out in any situation? Should I be extemporaneous? Should I, take me down that path first about, and then I guess, how personal should I be?
And that's the number one issue that comes up. First of all, I think before I wrote the book, my assumption was a couple things. One is that I thought that everyone had the same definition of a personal story, and that everyone felt comfortable or thought it was a viable thing to do as part of the learning experience. And I learned out I was horribly wrong. There are a lot of people.
My children
who don't want to. And then I was realizing that my definition of a personal story is more conservative, I guess, than what other people conjure up when I say personal story, and they begin to clutch their pearls and go, I would never share anything like that. I'm like, I wouldn't either. Like, that's not what I was referring to. So I think we can, all agree the baseline is that a personal story is something that happened to you. And that's pretty much all we agree on. After that, what does that mean?
Right.
So I like to say, that, a personal story is one that happened to you, and one that you learned from, one that you grew from, but the context has to be match the context that you're in for the most part. The blinds blur because there are things that happen in your personal life that taught you about business, and there's things that happen in your business life that taught you about your personal life as well. It's really up to you as the storyteller to know what those connections are and to be able to bridge that gap. I think that as I have learned, and I always say that, there's this line in the sand, there's open, and then there's the anagram of open, which is nope, right? It's that one step part where I'm like, I'm not talking about that. Right. And I found that the more skilled you become in storytelling, the more control that you believe you have, because I think there's this fear that you're going to blurt out something that's inappropriate. We've actually heard stories. I mean, I've been in classrooms back in the day where it's just like, dude, like that's not, why are you saying that's completely inappropriate for this room?
TMI.
We've heard those types of things before. And I think those people lack a sense of, propriety, but also discipline and control. And the more you learn about control and intent and establishing intent, I believe that note side needs to close off a little, because you're like, I know what my boundaries are. I know the purpose of this story. I know how to use it as a tool to get what I need to get. And that's why I feel comfortable sharing more of it. There's a story that may be a little too personal. And so you shave different parts off of that story and say, this is the part I'm going to share. But if you don't know how to do that, then you're like, I'm not going to talk. I don't want to talk about it at all. The other concern that people have is that no one cares about their personal story. That's the big one.
That's interesting.
Is
that just sort of the internal I'm not important enough kind of feeling?
It's definitely based in that. And sometimes my mother lives with me, and sometimes I'm talking to people. She's like, are you a therapist now? Because
yes, the answer is yes.
I'm sort of like, do you value your story? Like, do you think your story is important? So some of it's based in that idea that I don't think my story is important. Everyone's done what I've done. There's nothing special about what I've done. And that's, maybe the actions that you took, you moving to a new city and didn't know anyone. Maybe that's a classic tale that everyone, but again, a lot of people have gone through, but your experience is unique to you and your background, where you came from, the lessons that you were told about independence and about how scared you were because you've never been on your own before, and you've never, like, all of that sort of becomes a part of that narrative and makes it unique in a way. So don't try to be unique, just, try to be you. So that personal, defining for yourself what a personal story is important, and understanding what those boundaries are. I would say that's the first step of acknowledging what you're going to share and what you're not going to share. I think the next one is a big one, and that is intent.
Okay.
I like to draw the difference between intent or point. I used to say the point of the story. But I have found that the point of the story is up to the listener. It's not up to you. I mean, we've always had that situation before where we told a story where we're like, I know what this story is about. I know what the outcome of this story is, and that's why I'm telling it. And then the listener just gets some weird message. You're like, you couldn't possibly have thought that that's what I was talking about. Like that. No, what are you? Or they get stuck on one little detail, and you're like, what? And that's because I've learned that they are not really hearing my story. They are hearing the words filtered through their own experience, right?
Can you say that again? 'Cause I think that's probably the most important sentence that we've heard in the last 15 minutes here. Like, say that again for me.
They're hearing your story filtered through their own experience. And so they are going to get the point. The point is for them. All you have is intent. And it becomes scary at that point because you don't want people to get ideas about you that you don't want. And the more skills you get, the more you can get that intent to match the point, but it's never going to match 100%. I have this one example that I use to my detriment. There was a point before I went on my own where I worked 2 full-time jobs at the same time. And one was remote, one was not. And they just, as a coincidence, were headquartered in the same building. Now,
I think there are a lot of people who want to figure out how you pulled that off.
And wouldn't you think? So when I first started telling this story, I wrote it once. I have a master's in writing. I wrote it once in that. And I didn't think I had any intent. I learned later that I did have an intent, is that I wanted you to think I was awesome. I mean, that was the
which we already know, but yeah, I get it.
And I thought I wanted you to be like, oh man, how do you? And I didn't think that I couldn't fathom any other response to that. And when I was in the class, you have to workshop it. People were like, oh, I wish it's like your reaction. I wish I could pull that off. That's wonderful. That's great. But everyone has to write a more detailed response on your paper, right? So I remember I went to a corner bakery, had my little lunch, and said, I'm going to read these responses, right? That are going to tell me
how awesome you are.
I'm a superhero.
Oh, yeah, you're awesome.
How could you? How could you do that? That's such an ethical violation of this, and you had to lie to somebody to do that, and you're a horrible person.
Oh,
nothing to my face, all behind. In the world, I was really, and at first I thought they were just a bunch of haters. And then later, as I told the story other times, many people had that same reaction. I remember one person said, isn't that stealing time? What I learned from that was that a couple of things. One is I assumed that people had a similar background to me. Where I grew up, everyone had multiple jobs.
Oh, heck yeah.
Having multiple jobs is just as American as apple pie.
It's just what you do. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's just how else are you going to get?
How else are you going to pay the bills? Yeah.
But you got it. That's the way to do it, on the up and up. And but these people were coming from, no, that is not, first of all, that some just thought it was dumb. Like, why would you do that to yourself? And other people were like, you're stealing jobs from other people who could get jobs. And I realized what I never revealed in the story was that I was working 90 hours. I mean, an ungodly amount of hours. If I was stealing time, it was stealing it from myself.
Sure.
I had to compromise, to tell myself stories, don't compromise my own ethics. I mean, one time I was in an elevator with both my bosses. And they didn't know. I mean, I could write a whole book based on the shenanigans that happened in this period.
I
Hopefully
want
they're not
you.
listening and
I
don't
want
know
you to
who they
write
are.
that book. I want you to
I
write that
know.
book immediately.
And
That's
later,
awesome.
the only guilt I really felt was that I couldn't help my coworkers as much as I wanted to help them. And later, years later, I would tell them and none of them noticed, which is either good or bad. That they didn't notice that I was working 2 jobs at the same time. That was the only real guilt. But I never revealed the vulnerable part. I never revealed, because my intent secretly was for them to think I was awesome. I wasn't going to talk about that. Was a fear-based decision. And that I sacrificed just building a life for myself by stuffing it in nonstop work, which was bad. Why did I think that? I didn't want to think that was okay, but what else was I going to do? I was in incredible credit card debt. That was the reason. I didn't want to admit that I was horrible with money and had run up this debt, and there was no way I could start my own business with all this credit card. But I didn't say any of that. All I said was I had 2 jobs and you don't have any, So I can see why people would respond to it that way in retrospect. And I use that as an example of making sure your intent is clear and understand that when that's by the time the story travels through the air, it gets to that person, it's going to hit a filter. And some of those people are just going to hear, that is dumb, that's unethical, or, oh my gosh, I wish I could do that too.
Well, I just want to, and to round this out though, like I would love, like I can hear both of those stories starting right now, right? Like if you were to start one and say, let me tell you about this time when I had 2 full-time jobs, and everything, and then you can hear the intents right there. It's like, hey, I'm going to tell you how awesome. But if you were to start the exact same story and to say, there was this time when I had, 3 credit cards that were completely maxed out, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, and then you get to the point where it's like, so what I did was, I feel like it turns into a completely different thing.
And that is why I've gotten into a few discussions about structure and the importance of structure. Structure is everything. And that's exactly the point that you made. And when I do teach that, I do that exact same thing. I just switch things around based on my intent, and your intent drives the structure of the story, right? Because I believe in stories that are useful in that they demonstrate a change, right? How did that experience change me? What changed? And so I can tell it in the way where I can start with, that ordinary world, that this is where I was in this incredible amount of debt and blah, blah, blah. And then go through the experience and how I came out on the other side. And that's what makes a story that's how you operationalize a story. That's how you make it useful to other people. It's not just I think that's what separates a story from an anecdote, right? Anecdote is just, this thing happened to me. What did you learn from it? Nothing. Just you didn't really learn. You're just telling me. You're just reporting. It's just a testimony at that point. However, a story that is useful, one that you can use in a learning and development context, it has to focus on a change. When I was in my master's program, they would say that, this story has to earn the right to exist. And it earns the right through change. And it doesn't have to be, I tell people, it doesn't have to be this big metamorphosis. It could just be a change in perspective, or more importantly, it could be a reveal, right? You were the same person.
Give me an example. What's a reveal?
So say, for example, you want to tell a story about confidence, and you had a job once where you wanted to take on more responsibility, but you were constantly shut down, and you begin to doubt, can I do this? Like, everyone's telling me I can't do it, or not giving me the opportunity. Maybe I can't do it. You get another job that affords you the opportunity. All of a sudden you can do all these things. You have, and you think, now I've grown. But maybe you haven't. Maybe you could always do those things, but now you're just given the opportunity to show it. And so you knew it was inside of you. It's like the Wizard of Oz. It was inside of you all along. And it wasn't until you were put to the test or given the opportunity to really put it to work did you see, oh, okay, now I can do it. So because I think when I say change, people really start digging for, real big changes. And honestly, a lot of us, either we don't recognize change or we don't change in that much. But a lot is revealed to us about who we are. Sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes it's not always good,
And
what
also
I would learn about myself.
I love those So man, I've just got so many questions because I want to talk about vulnerability, like because you mentioned that in the beginning as well, where that's hard for a lot of us, right? Like
It is.
especially because so choosing that level of vulnerability. But before we go down that path, I want to ask you this. So I think a lot of people talking or listening right now will be thinking to themselves, I'm not an actor, I'm not a comedian, I'm not, I'm not a TED speaker. Like where do I start if I'm a middle level manager, if I'm, a teacher in a university, whatever, like, where do I start with this to start putting things in and building that muscle of storytelling? Is that, how do I practice this in a way where I'm probably going to stumble and whatnot, but like take me to that point. Like, how do I start this? And then we can kind of maybe tease out some of those other little pieces.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is those same people just told you a story that was the most amazing story about something that happened to them. And yet, if you try to put it in a formal context, I can't. I can't, right? Because they see stories as this very formal thing, this very formal process. They've seen people do it well. They've seen all you can do at the end of the day is practice and try different ideas around it. But the first thing you have to acknowledge is that you're already a storyteller. I mean, you already are. There's no debate. There's no discussion. You're already a storyteller. So the point now is just to be more purposeful and think about what your intent is. Sometimes you're like, well, I'm bad because I'm a bad storyteller because I went into this meeting and I told a story and people were looking at me like I was okay, because you didn't go in with intent. Your intent was to be funny, right? Your intent was to make people like you. And that those intents are fine, but that didn't happen, did it? Right? Because you didn't even acknowledge that as your intent, right? So be more purposeful about the stories that you tell. I think if you start doing that first of what do I want, when I'm saying intent, I mean, what do I want to happen as a result of this story? I already established that the points you want to make may not get across the way you want it to get across, but what do you want to happen as a result? How do you want people to see you? If you want people to see you as trustworthy, you're in an interview, then you tell stories about you being trustworthy, right? I mean, it's really just thinking about what do I want to accomplish this. And if you don't know what that is, then maybe you're not ready to go. Yeah, you need to take a step back and think, what do I want to accomplish? There's lots of, structures and things you can experiment with, but I would say it's always this. Where did I start? A situation happened, and what did I learn from it? It's always this, situation. What's the transformation? How did that transformation influence me? And what was the result? I'm working on this acronym called STIR, like stir up a story, right? What happened? What was the transformation and how did it influence me? One of the most important things is what did I learn from this? If you didn't learn anything from it, then it's just an anecdote, and that's fun, that's cool. But it's not going to be a story that is going to move people. Stories that move people are moving. Like you have to sort of.
Well, and you can even use that as well. Like the things that move. I mean, that's just another metaphor for the change, right? They're like, because you move, you change, right? You move from one place to another, right?
Right. And so when people say, I just was watching something the other day where, where it was like, just, there is this sort of belief that just get to the point. We don't need any fluff. Well, if I'm teaching you Microsoft Excel, then okay, then you want to know about Excel. But if it's something that I need you to trust me on and believe in me on, if I'm teaching you something, in training, we're in the sales business. This is sales.
Shh, don't tell them that. Don't tell them that.
It's sales, right? I mean, you're not selling the car, you're selling life with the car, but in order for you to believe that you're going to have this great time with this car, it doesn't look so great now, but in your hands, it's going to be amazing. In order for you to believe that, then you have to know who I am. You have to trust me, and I need to be able to reveal something to you. I have to put some stakes in it. I can't just be a robot. that's just going to come in and say, give me your information. Okay,
Right.
I'm going to create you. I guess now you can do that with AI. Maybe that's possible. But yeah, you need to show a little bit of yourself if you want them to be comfortable with you. But you have to, those, I can't draw those lines for you. You're going to have to really think about what they are for yourself. But the more skill you get, I think the wider, the more number of stories you'll have and parts of stories you'll have and that you'll be able to reveal.
I want to riff off of something that unexpectedly you stumbled into the AI chat here.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just hit on that for a second, because one of the reasons, if I can just get on a soapbox for a second, that people are freaking out right now about AI is because suddenly they're finding this artificial intelligence that is telling stories, right? It's having personality in a way that they're unable to distinguish from other humans, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so at one, it emphasizes your entire premise about why this is so important, because that is what catches our attention. That's what makes the human experience human. But I also think that there's another silver lining around this as well, is that I don't care how much data Chat GPT has in it, it will never have a human experience.
Right.
And so for you, for me, for a trainer, for a sales, for whatever, that's that quality that you can put into your story that, it's the unexpected, or it's the twist, or it's the aha moment, whatever you want to call it, that you can't create that with a gajillion data points, right?
Yeah, I mean, eventually,
I don't. What do you think of that? Did I just completely destroy that?
Well, I mean, I'm not I don't want to speak too much about it because I'm not an expert on it, but I do know eventually you have to show up as a human being. And pretty soon you're going to have to, you can have a cover letter with AI, you have a resume with AI, pretty soon you're going to be in a meeting with somebody and you're going to be able to express yourself passionately and eloquently. And can you do that? Can you be the same person that was created for you in this AI? I do want to say, though, too, that's interesting. One thing that I teach when I talk about storytelling, I reference movies a lot. And I'm always letting people know that there's a reason why you feel the way you feel after a movie. It's all formula. I mean, they know how to turn this light on, turn this light off. The good ones know how to do that, how to move this here, move that there. And this is another example of how these things can be learned. Like if a machine can learn it, you can learn it. I mean, it can be learned. It's studied, and it knows if I put this here and put that there and put that there, I can trigger some sort of response out of you. And so you can do the same thing with your own writing, right? It can be learned. It can be learned, and it's something. It's old, from the beginning of time. It's something that's old. So. Something that you could be practiced, something that you can see in a variety of different ways. So, yeah.
So final question for you on this chat, because I really hope that we get to chat again, is what are the challenges? What are the pitfalls, the mistakes that, when you're working with your clients, what are the holes that they usually fall into, and either how do you avoid them or how do you pull yourself out of them?
Mm-hmm. Well, as a story coach, one thing I'm always careful with is to not open doors I can't close, right? So that's something that happens sometimes, in that there's some things that we just haven't gotten over, and we think we have. This is definitely true when I'm working with people who got laid off and they want to tell their story as part of their interview. And they have this story of this trauma of being laid off, maybe multiple times. And they still have so much rage that they haven't dealt with. And it comes through. They don't think it does, but it does. It comes through in the story. So I would say trying to add unresolved issues in your story is sometimes it comes up a lot. I will say something else about vulnerability in that way, which is related to this. You do not owe the world a breakdown. You don't, people say vulnerable, authenticity, and all that stuff. And those things are tools. Those things are tools that can be part of what you're trying to accomplish, part of your intent. If I express vulnerability, then people will see me in a certain way and they will trust me, or they will feel comfortable expressing their vulnerability or what have you. When I work with leaders, I always say, think headlight, not spotlight, right? So instead of just thinking me, think me in service of you. How is this story going to be useful to you, right? And I think that's another pitfall, is that people think storytelling is just about their great stories. And it's not at all. It's not about you. It's about your life in service of someone else's. And so it takes some time to really connect. This is a great and fun story, but I don't know how people can take this and incorporate it as part of their own experience. How can they see themselves reflected in this story I have about camp? Like, how can they do that? And so it takes you to do some work to think, again, it's not about this spotlight. It's how can I tell it in a way that's a headlight that can lead the way for others. So challenges around vulnerability, unresolved issues, and thinking that the story is just about them and forgetting that it's in service of others, I think are three pitfalls that I see a lot when it comes to personal storytelling.
Hadiya Nuriddin. Did I get it right again?
Yeah.
Wow. 2 times in a row. Amazing. You are the owner of Duets Learning. And you also are the author of the book StoryTraining, which is selecting and shaping stories that connect. Is there anything else that any other way that you'd like for people to connect with you that we should tell them right now?
Well, I do have a channel on YouTube called Lived Learn. If you go to my website, you can connect through it that way. So I have some videos on storytelling. I also have a whole series on my freelance journey called The Fog of Freelancing. I got that title from, I love documentaries and I'm obsessed with the Vietnam War. I don't know why. There's this documentary movie called The Fog of War, 10 Lessons for the Vietnam War. So I got it from that anyway. So it's just about these 10 lessons and their personal stories. And so I use those sometimes to demonstrate different ways that you can tell a personal story that also ends in a lesson for others to take away with them on their journey.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to the eLearn podcast. I just wanted to take one last moment here to ask you to, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, if you had fun, if you liked the guest, if you wanted to learn more, if you feel like sharing this with somebody, do me a favor. Hit subscribe on your podcast player right now. Just do it right now before the episode ends. Hit subscribe, and that way you'll never miss an episode as we publish them every week. Thanks.